LDComics is a women-led welcoming to all forum run by creators. We champion the graphic novel form, particularly works with an autobiographical voice. Our activity is towards supporting and equipping graphic novelists, especially but not exclusively people identifying as women. Established in 2009 by Sarah Lightman and Nicola Streeton as Ladies Do Comics, today LDComics is run by a committee of 6 published graphic novelists: Charlotte Bailey, Rachel Ball, Emma Burley, Lou Crosby, Wallace Eates, and Nicola Streeton. From the start, the core of LDC's activity has been the monthly meetings, hosting presentations from invited guests to a public audience in a welcoming atmosphere for networking and making friends. The introduction of LDC online monthlies aims to replicate the joy and stimulation of our physical meetups. Everyone is welcome.
So I'm MK Czerwiec. I'm a nurse and a cartoonist, and my work exists in the large intersection of comics and health known as graphic medicine. Colleagues and I, graphic medicine, this is our website, graphicmedicine.org. As I said, it's a huge intersection. There are a lot of resources, more added every day on this website if you are interested in where comics and healthcare come together, comics and health, illness, caregiving, disability, all of those themes. Colleagues and I worked on this book, the Graphic Medicine Manifesto, to explore and explain why comics can and should have a serious role in health and well-being. But before I go any further, I want to say that it is an absolute honor to again present at LDC, Ladies Do Comics. The projects that I will be talking about really have grown together with LDC and have been influenced by and shaped by the conversations and the community here, and I'm very grateful for that. Ladies, LD Comics creates a fertile environment that really fosters mutual growth. And I am especially grateful that LDC has used the terrible circumstances of our pandemic to make these meetings available globally, and that share that creative inspiration when we need it most. So thank you to all of you who make this possible. Back to me. When I was trying to figure out how to make memoir comics, I created this project where I made a comic for every year of my life, sort of like rings on a tree, right? Starting at the inside and going out. And I highly recommend this if anyone is interested. The comics don't look like this, but this was sort of a cover page. It was the inspiration for the project actually was seeing a tree that had been cut down and thinking about actually and they weren't, long comics. They were maybe 4 panels per year, or maybe, if something special happened, maybe 8 panels per year. It's really interesting project to track your own life in that way. So that was a great introduction to kind of making memoir comics. I was not the kid at school. So these are 2 separate panels from that project. I was not the kid at school who could draw. I was told to put my crayons away and my markers away and use my words. And I was good with words. So that continued to be reinforced. And unfortunately, I left images behind. I did not start making comics until my 30s. And it was really the way that I came to comics was as it turned out, it was absolutely the most efficient way to cope with what it was like to be a frontline caregiver during our last pandemic, HIV/AIDS. Comics is such a powerful medium, and it's able to contain and do so much work. Comics enabled me to process those difficult experiences so I could then be truly present to my patients. So I thought I'd start with one example. This is a very early comic I did called Larry. I rode my bike to work one day. It was an exhausting shift. Then someone called in sick for night, so I had to stay to work a double shift. When I came out of the hospital at 7:30 a.m., my bike was gone. I slept a few hours and then came back for my shift at 3. Everyone felt really bad about my bike, especially my patient, Larry. When you get a chance, come back and talk to me, okay? Okay. Larry was a nurse too, but couldn't work anymore. He loved to teach. So when I started on Unit 371, a unit he knew very well, he appointed himself my patient preceptor. We spent a lot of time together. You see, you want to put the catheter in kind of on an angle like this. Isn't this kind of weird, Larry? After I'd passed my 5 o'clock meds that night, I stopped by to see what Larry wanted to talk about. Look, here's the deal. I've got a lot of money and no one to leave it to. Please let me buy you a new bike. Please, it's important to me. I'm not sure what I said, but somehow I got out of his room, ran to the locker room, burst into tears. I felt so lost, so small, so sad. I wanted to let Larry buy me a bike, to let him take care of me. Plus, I didn't know how to tell him no. But we both knew it was totally inappropriate, so I pulled myself together and went back to his room to tell him exactly that. You understand, right? Yeah, but no one would have to know. Larry was discharged the next day and died at home a month later. I know I did the right thing, but I've never quite trusted appropriate since. So, knowing how to process experience like this is not really something that gets taught in nursing school. In fact, it never even really gets addressed. How do you deal with these difficult situations? But of course, it's essential to survival as caregivers and as humans. And comics gave me the ability to do that. So the larger project, my graphic memoir, Taking Turns, is a much broader take on what that unit was, Unit 371. And it's a story of what HIV and AIDS care looked like inside one Chicago hospital. I start all of my creative projects with questions, right? Because if I knew the answers, there'd really be no reason to do the work. That's why we do this work, right? We start with questions. So for Taking Turns, the questions were, I started working on this book quite a few years after the unit had closed. And one of the questions was, am I the only one haunted by experiences and images from being a frontline caregiver during the AIDS crisis? Have other people just moved on? Because I was really having trouble doing so. And just generally, how do we as caregivers balance providing connected, compassionate care to patients and their families, yet also attend to the enormous toll that takes on us as vulnerable human beings? And of course, that has echoes in this moment now. And then broadly too, like, what are the appropriate boundaries that help do that work? And this one was really critical. As a care provider, you're always told, well, take care of yourself, make sure you take care of yourself. Really, the question animating a lot of this was, what the hell does that mean? Like, getting a massage now and then? Like, that doesn't seem like it quite works. That's not enough. What does self-care really mean? So in an effort to answer those questions, this book is informed by a 25 narrator oral history of this place, Unit 371. Many of the narrators in the oral history stepped in with answers when sort of me as character nurse in the text had questions. And here's an excerpt about art and the role that it played on our unit when I began questioning connections between art and health. Making art was an important part of life on Unit 371. Most of what hung on the walls was by or about our patients. The art room was the heart of the unit, a place where possibility, maybe even joy, could still show up, maybe make something. Oh, hey, it's you, come on in. No, okay. I made this for the staff, okay? The art therapy program was established and run by Russell Leander. My job is to design and offer a space and an opportunity for patients to go and do something. They can listen to music or play some, they can draw, paint, visit with friends. They can meet someone to talk with, or they can make a mask or a bean mosaic. The hospital administration devoted a room that could be generating income to the art therapy program. I think that demonstrates a real commitment. Some of the stuff that patients do is pretty remarkable. I have a drawing done by a patient, a quiet fellow from a private room who initially didn't want to come to the art room. After a few days of my trying, he finally came in. He drew for a while with oil pastels. When he was done drawing, he put his pastel down. You know what that is? It looks like a flower. Yeah, it's a flower. I'm a flower. That's my spirit. Do you know what that is? I'm not sure. It's a lawnmower. It's got a full tank of gas and it's barreling down on me, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. A few days later, Dr. Blatt popped in to say hello. Oh, hey, come in. I want to show you something. I showed him the drawing and told him the story. You know, I couldn't get that close to him. I think that's emblematic of the purpose of the art room. The art room can offer all of us an alternative emotional vocabulary. So the next book project that I worked on is an edited collection called Menopause, a Comic Treatment. It came about from another set of questions, ones that were pressing on me around when I was turning 50. What the hell is going on in my body? Why are we not talking more about this? And once again, am I the only one going through this? It was astonishing to me that though I was a nurse, I really knew so little about menopause. And when I looked around in popular culture for references, particularly in comics, most of what I found was actually quite offensive. Case in point, the only other anthology of comics about menopause is actually not an anthology, it's just a collection by this person, Nora Preddy. And the example you see there is from the introduction in our book. I was able to excerpt it. Tilly the Tearful, buckets of tears, why don't you dry up? I've tried everything. Now I'm going home to mother. That's the husband. And she, of course, is continuing to cry. And the comics in this book are that and way worse. They basically are women as horrible burdens to their husband while they're in perimenopause. Other women chastising women for not getting their surgery or taking their pills. So this is from the 50s. And yeah, so I wanted to be a part of changing this conversation. And through ladies and through graphic medicine and through queers and comics, I actually knew many amazing humans who would help me with these kinds of questions. So I asked for comics. And the book is a wonderful collection of comics that I can say is amazing. And I'm so grateful for all the wonderful cartoonists who were a part of this. In fact, it was actually the New York Times best graphic novel of 2020, which is kind of crazy because it's not even a graphic novel, but of course you don't argue about these distinctions when this happens. And the thing, I mean, I'm so excited because I'm just like so excited about this book. But the other thing I absolutely love is I'm pretty confident it's the first time the word menopause has been used in any New York Times best of list, right? So that was really exciting. And I want to share a small sampling of a few of the amazing artists talking about their work. And the great thing is, thanks to COVID, I actually have 1-minute videos of a few of them that I've selected to talk about their work.
Hello, I'm Rachel House, and I'm speaking to you now from the Feminist United Crone Kindred Society headquarters, where I'm holed up during this pandemic. It's a pretty intense place to be, as you can imagine. When it's safe to do so, join us. We recruit. We want you with us. For Menopause Comic Treatment, I've done a version of Climacteric Calamity. Not a happy story, but ultimately empowering. But now, I just want to tell you that from the other side of menopause, I've never felt so good in my body. I don't have the disconnect that I've always felt. It's a really, really good place to be. Even though some bits of my body are slightly letting me down, it's very good to be here. You'll enjoy it too. Bye.
Hi, my name is Juan Mance, and the name of my comic is Any Day Now. My comic highlights the need for more gender-inclusive information on menopause. Most information that's available about menopause presumes femininity and cisgender identity. I'm very interested in using my comic to amplify the need for more inclusivity, and I also hope it makes you laugh.
Hi, I'm Linda Berry. This is my comic, Menopositive. I'm just going to read you the first page. Like a lot of kids, my ideas about certain things came from eavesdropping on adults like my grandma, my aunts, and their friends who were sitting around smoking and drinking coffee. So I'm listening to them. And one is saying, you know, the doctor took out her bahay bata. I no. They say for some this is better. So I knew bahay is house, bata is kid. So I say to my grandma, so she had a baby house inside of her? Stupido. It's not a baby house, it's the uterus. This was in the 1970s when a record number of women underwent hysterectomy, including my mother and many of my relatives. Menopause didn't happen in a natural way for them, and everyone seemed to feel pretty good about not having a uterus, except for my grandma, who wasn't into it. She said, God don't like it. He doesn't like hysterectomies. God don't like it. He don't like uterus? He's stupid though. God loves uterus. Sounds better in Tagalog. And then the next day I went and visited my white friends across the street and was telling them the news. And my girlfriend says, whose uterus? And her mom goes, I'd appreciate it if you did not say uterus in my kitchen.
Hi everyone, I'm Monica. I'm a doctor, a comic artist, and a mother, and someone very fond of graphic medicine. Being part of this project has been a huge privilege. What a team. My chapter, When My Biological Clock Stopped Ticking, was really fun to do, but it also has given me the chance to reflect on this time of my life. Fertility doesn't define me. Readers, go on.
I find the best way with the hot flush is hit the sweat with the sweat. High octane dancing.
So you can imagine why I'm so excited about the book, and there's so much more. It's been a tremendous project, and I'm very grateful, as I said, to everyone who contributed to it. So other areas of the work I do includes teaching and advocacy. I teach in medical schools, undergraduate. I kind of just will go anywhere and talk about graphic medicine, and then use comics for advocacy within health and healthcare. So one particular area that I've focused my work on is end-of-life care. And I've worked with quite a few colleagues to look at ways that we could use comics to get people to talk about what we call advanced care planning, getting people to talk about what their wishes are about, towards the end of their life, if their loved ones have to make these decisions for them. But of course, these are really difficult conversations to just have on a Saturday or just without reason, but they're best had when no one is sick. And so people put it off, and it's troubling. And so we've come up with a whole bunch of projects that involve comics to try to help do that important work. When COVID first hit, I actually was teaching a class called Death Panels about the way in which comics are used at end of life. And I made this goofy comic called The Good Death. Ira Byock writes that there are 4 things a dying person needs to say and hear. Please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. And I love you. So, Dad, I just want you to know I forgive you. You forgive me for what? Well, like for whatever, the usual stuff. Did you read about this in a book? Yes, I'm sorry. I forgive you. Thank you. I love you. I also do comics for kind of educational interventions and research. So this is a comic that was used to help empower patients to know that they have the right to see the screen if their doctor is looking at a computer during a clinical encounter. And this study using this comic was just published by colleagues at the University of Chicago. That really all I do is make comics, and then they do some really sophisticated research around them. And there was a really good outcome with this one in terms of parents in a pediatric clinic remembering on a phone call a couple of months out from the visit, actually what their rights were when it came to talking with the doctor about the computer screen. And so that's been exciting to be a part of those projects. And then just kind of last up, so all of that work really got interrupted by COVID, as all of our lives got interrupted by COVID. And through graphic medicine, one of the most useful things, I'm not working clinically as a nurse presently, so I was trying to make myself useful. And I had known from my previous work around AIDS in comics that a lot of the comics used in public health during the AIDS crisis had gotten lost to history. And so my colleague Alice Jaggers, who's a medical librarian, and I decided, like, well, we could archive a lot of them, everything that was coming across our social media. And as much as we were seeing COVID comics, we could start categorizing them and archiving them. And you'll see these are kind of the categories that we developed to organize information that came in comic form during, and obviously the last two were added later, during COVID than the last year. And then, of course, the other thing that graphic medicine has done during COVID was have, for a while they were weekly, then they became kind of monthly, and now they're bi-monthly sessions called Drawing Together. And if you'd like to learn more about either of those projects, you can go to graphicmedicine.org. Drawing Together, we've done about 25 sessions, and we actually have an archive of all of the exercises being explained by the host. So the way they work is someone hosts it, the participants are given a drawing prompt. They draw according to a theme that the host has decided on, and then we all share the work that we've done. And we've wanted to make sure that this was very accessible. So as I said, there's a full archive of all of those. And our COVID comics are there as well. And so finally, right now I'm trying to sort of find my way back into my own memoir comics work. And I left off that map project around where my book Taking Turns starts, 1994. And I'm working on filling in the years between now and then with those sort of comic for a year of my life. And I really thought I was going to work on comics about end-of-life care for my own family members, and think about how like and unlike it was to care for family members at end of life versus my patients who had died much younger. But I'm coming to realize that actually a more pressing issue that I want to explore in my comics goes all the way back to the beginning of this process, which is my own adoption, or my being placed for adoption, which was done under this veil of secrecy and shame. The way that adoption was done in the US in 1967 was that basically mostly to this day, my biological origin is literally a state secret. I have a fake birth certificate, and it's really kind of crazy. And I was very inspired hearing another speaker talking about this topic in a very different cultural context not long ago on LDC. So now I have questions, and I have a whole new set of questions, and that work begins. So thank you very, very much for listening. And this is my website, and I am at Comic Nurse on most social media. Thank you so much.
In the meantime, I'm going to start talking about this book that's coming out and the process of making it a bit. So it's called Stone Fruit. This is the cover without the title on it, because this is the picture I could find on my computer. And it's basically just about a handful of tangled relationships. It's about the breakdown of a queer relationship between the two figures you see that are taller, and the ensuing relationships that unfolds with their relatively estranged families after breakup. So it's about a lot of ideas around sisterhood and estrangement and coming closer together. It's also a lot about childcare and like different queer ideas of family and power dynamics between biological family and chosen family. It's very much fictional, but it's also highly personal. Nothing in it was directly drawn from my life, but it was, I think all the feelings that are in the book are very much things I've felt and experienced so far in my life. I have a cat that's scratching on my chair. Hold on. Look at that. So I'm going to talk about process first. So if you want to go to the next slide, Nicola. I think it should be a picture of the script. Sorry, you're all quite great, amazing. This is all quite slow on my screen because my computer is very old, but it seems like everyone's hearing me okay. So as long as that's okay, then we can probably manage. Okay, so I started this. I started this book as just a script, and it was just script format for the first year that I was working on it. I think the entire book took me around 3 years. I don't storyboard, which is, I think, quite an unpopular approach. And I think it's just generally a lot more advisable to storyboard, but instead I tend to write really detailed scripts. And so this started out as a script. I worked on it in a class. I took a brief script writing class that most people were doing screenplays in, but I chose to do a graphic novel because I've been working in comics for the past 7 years or so. And it was the first experience I had of long form comics. And so it was really challenging and horrifying to not have any artwork to support the writing when I was submitting it to an entire class worth of workshopping and critique. It's the first time someone was just reading my writing. And it was also the first time I was writing without pictures since I was under 10 maybe. And all I was writing was strange, inappropriate little ditties and things like that when I was a kid. And so it was really helpful, honestly, to have this script being passed around to a bunch of students who are around the same age as me, give or take 5 years, and having feedback that was confronting and extremely constructive, things that were just like, I can't tell what's happening, all the characters sound the same, the pacing's kind of boring. Like, I tend to write a lot about just relationships and quiet conversations that happen between two people and micro tensions and things like that. And so it was really helpful to make sure that I wasn't boring the readers, especially if there's no pretty pictures to look at. So yeah, the script writing process was really helpful for me to kind of scrub the story and work on several drafts of it, and boil it down to something that really felt like honest and emotionally appropriate for what I wanted to convey. And if I got to the point where I could read it through and sense the movement of the story, and kind of like have it spelled out in beats and blocks, and feel like I was being held by the story. I mean, it's harder to tell because I think it's harder to have perspective on your own story in general. But when I felt like it got to that stage, I started writing it out. And it was really helpful, actually, because at the point when I started drawing it, I started giving it to my friends for feedback. And it was really great to have their feedback. And I ended up changing a bunch of things that happened in the story. One of the characters I kind of deserted in a corner for a while because I just didn't know what happened to her. In my mind, there was just a black hole where she went in the story, and having a friend really, really push me to keep her story present throughout the book allowed me to kind of rehaul the structure of the story. And I ended up reading a bunch of writers' interviews, like just regular prose fiction writers. And I was looking at Celeste Ng's work. And she talks about picturing her story as a braid, where she had all these different strings that were being braided together in the center and weaving into the central narrative. And I thought about that relentlessly as I was writing this and rewriting it, and ended up using that structure a little bit myself. I'm going to check because someone asked a question and it seems to be something that's probably relevant to right now. Okay, Jenny, did you have a picture in your head of what the pages would look like when you wrote the script? Absolutely, yes. I'm like quite single-minded and often go into a picture or go into a script or a project or a drawing having quite a vivid sense of how I want to look. It doesn't mean I get there. I think I have like a lot of vivid memories when I was a kid of having a really strong idea of how I wanted something to turn out visually and just not having the technical skills to get anywhere close to it. And just having like a profound internal meltdown about that. And amongst a lot of other very sharp, deep curves in learning with this book, one of them was just figuring out how to draw things. This is a good segue. Maybe go to the next slide. I'm going to show you some of the pencils. So I guess I'll shop a little bit before I go to maybe some of the more vague fiction and story building aspects. Okay, so this is a scene from the 3rd chapter. It's a nightmare scene. It's got the character who is called Rachel or Ray, and she encounters her girlfriend who's kind of slipping away from her into a kind of numbed out depression state. And she encounters her in a nasty dark forest and tries to get her to leave because the plants are slowly eating her alive. And Bron, who's lying there in the forest, is just completely disinterested in moving at all. And so she's just kind of screaming at her. And this is, I think, a good example of how much detail I want to put into it. You can go to the next slide. There's another example of some petals before I go into these. Everything in this book is a foregrid. It is very much intentional. It's quite boring, I think, to draw just the foregrid. Like, I really admire and love the ways that a lot of comic artists do really interesting diagrams in their work. But I found that for me, I just want the panels to be kind of cinematic beats where the characters are just going through the paces of their dialogue. I don't like to have too much text per panel because I'm a terrible reader. I'm vaguely dyslexic, and I mostly just want to look at the pictures while also having as much emotion as possible come through the panels. So this page is with Amanda and Ray, who are sisters who are kind of trying to make it work. This is a good example of how much speaking they're going to do to each other per panel. And sometimes I really just want a couple of stuttered sentences with a furrowed brow and slightly twisted mouth, because I think that's all that certain panels need. One thing I decided in this book, if you go to the next panel, I think there'll be an example of this. One of the things I decided in this book is that I didn't want to have backgrounds in all of my panels. So when I put the paint on top, I do gouache as a background first. So they're kind of like slightly messier backgrounds, mostly gray and blue and a little bit of black, and like relatively chalky. And then laid on top of that is the inks. And it was important to me to not have the backgrounds consistent through all of the panels and just have some panels that were just inks. For one thing, I wanted to just have some room to breathe for the eyes. Like I found that there just wasn't a necessity to have backgrounds in all of the panels. I just think it didn't contribute to the story in any meaningful way or the pacing. And then also I think there was something that I think I experienced in my life too, that when I'm very immersed in a conversation, backgrounds just kind of melt away. Oh no, it's entirely frozen.
We can still hear you, Lee.
Are we still here?
Yeah. We can hear you.
Oh, great. Okay. I got
see.
the little spinning. I got the spinning wheel on my computer, so I wasn't sure if the whole thing is just frozen out. But as long as I'm still here, that's great. Oh, great, wonderful. I'm glad it sounds better. Okay. If you want to go to the next slide, I've got a picture of some of the materials that I use. Great. Okay. So on the left, oh, something's happening there. On the left, we've got just some ceramic plates. I use them for all of my gouache backgrounds. Above it, there is the Bristol board that I use. I think it's just one of the tips I got from a lot of cartoonists. It's extremely smooth. It's Strathmore brand. It allows me to do pretty extensive line work and not smudge around too much. It keeps it pretty clean. The little dropper bottle in the middle just keeps some speedball ink in it, which I drop it onto that tiny little palette. That allows me to keep my palette relatively frequently washed so that no dust gathers on it, because I think the lines stay real smooth that way. All the line work is done. I love talking shop. I just saw a comment that said I love seeing drawing materials. I really like talking shop. It feels like a really important and juicy part of talking about comics. And it's not really separable from story building as well, because I don't know, there is a really tactile element to building stories, specifically in cartooning. And so I think I like being able to talk about it with probably you're all a bunch of comics nerds, and I really appreciate that. Okay, so the Unipin pen there is one that I use for all my lettering. I initially used a brush for lettering, but I found that brushes just changed too much. And some days they would work incredibly well, and some days they would work terribly. And so I cracked it finally and switched to fine liner because it was the only answer. And then the real revelation of the last, truly the big up on Unipin. It is very smudge free. It's really consistent. It gives a really nice line. It doesn't give me repetitive strain. The big revelation was using these. They're just brushes for miniature painting and fine line work. They're all Winsor & Newton. They are about $8 more expensive than the ones I was buying from the art store previously, and paying that extra $8 for a grand total of $20 per brush was the best decision I've ever made for my work. These ones are very smooth and very fluid, and I've found that when I'm starting to question my ability to paint a single line at all, it's probably time to change my brush and give myself a bit of a break. Also at the bottom of the picture, there's a couple of erasers. One, the Stedler, it's the $1 eraser that you get from the pharmacy. That one does a lot of the heavy cleanup when I've ruined an entire page and it's really unsalvageable. That's the one that kind of comes into play, but mostly I try and use the kneadable eraser, which allows me to, it makes drawing feel like sculpting, especially when I'm working with the body and there's all these subtle differences in the curves that I don't create, or subtle expression differences. It allowed me to kind of subtract a little bit of the line work without pulling away everything at once and completely destroying the shape of what I'm making. So that was really, really helpful. Okay, I think that covers most of the shop talk. Please, if you want to know anything that I haven't covered, you can chuck it in the chat. But I might go on to talk about character development, because that was a big part of figuring out how to build this larger story. So if you want to go to the next slide, Nicola, it should show a picture of the original version of Auntie Bron, who is one of the queer aunties who takes care of Nessie, who is a 6-year-old. And in this one, I made this about 4 years ago. And in this picture, Nessie is just shown as this weird furry creature with very long limbs and very long wings and this real grumpy expression. Both of these people were the kind of central characters that I had as the seed of the story. I didn't know a lot of the larger relationship arcs that were going to happen in the story. In its final form, it's 230 pages. And I think I only had about 80 pages worth of script figured out when I started drawing it. But when I had this in previous experiences of wanting to try out different characters, that one of the ways I build them is I build these little vignettes. So this was the first page of a little vignette that I did, I think about 4 years ago, to just feel out the dynamic between a non-biological auntie hanging out with the kid. And so this was just like a 4-pager, I think, where Nessie, who's a 6-year-old, has just had a real big tantrum, and they're walking along an alleyway together, decompressing and talking about what happened and what happens in their bodies when a tantrum like that happens. And Auntie Bron is talking about the fact that she feels those feelings too, but she just can't express it by breaking things and throwing things and screaming in the same way. So she just kind of pushes it into a certain part of her body. And this was a good opportunity to kind of feel out maybe the boundaries of what I wanted to address in Bron's character in terms of her experience in mental health. And also to really figure out how to do child dialogue, because that shit is hard. Like trying to capture the ways in which a 6-year-old can be extremely smart and incredibly intuitive, and also very much 6 and not having the vocabulary or the understanding necessarily to be able to meet Bron on her level as someone in her 20s. These kinds of vignettes and sketches were really, really helpful to get that out. If you go to the next slide, it should be a picture of both of them actually in their monster forms. So another thing that motivated the beginning of this story was that I wanted to show play between grown-up queers and children, and the ways in which magical thinking and strange emotional outlets can come through. It was also an opportunity for me to loosen up my style, because I tend to draw pretty tight and more in a relatively pedestrian, stylized, realistic way. And so having them shapeshift into monster form, aside from the possibilities, it was really great chance to be able to just play for myself as a cartoonist with my style and my line work a lot more, to like explore a bit of texture. And also, Stone Fruit is a story where 2 people who are trying their absolute best have a horrible breakup, and there's a lot of stuff around depression, narcissism, and phobia. Like it's a heavy story in a lot of ways, and it can make me feel pretty sad. I wanted there to be a chance to have some levity in the story. So Dina asked, what kind of paint is that? It is gouache. It's really chalky, and it dries really fast, and it allows for a nice relationship between inks, which is like more of the finer lines. And I love it. I've been using it for the last 10 years or something. It's working out pretty well for me so far. If you go to the next slide, there's going to be a page between Amanda and Ray. So these 2 are sisters, and they haven't been getting along for very long. In the backstory of their relationship is that they're just extremely different. Amanda's like pretty normative and has taken a relatively heteronormative choice and path, and Ray is like much more edgy, kind of like a bit of an anarchist, pretty angry at everything, and pretty determined to live something that looks very different to Amanda's life. And the thing that has brought them closer together is that Amanda's boyfriend left when Nessie as a child was a lot younger, and Ray has stepped in to do a lot of childcare for Amanda. And so this was a scene that came out later on because I was starting to gossip about my characters a lot more with my friends around me, as if they were real people. And originally in the script, Amanda was just a full villain. Like she was just an antagonist who was just a big buzzkill for Ray and Bron as the playful, fun aunties. And she was also quite transphobic towards Bron. And it was really helpful as I developed the script more to talk about her with friends as if she was a real character, because it really helped me to see her prickly side as something that could be, addressed with compassion and complexity. So this is a scene where Rachel has just been broken up with, and she goes over to Amanda's house in a flood of tears. And she asks if she can not take care of Nessie every Tuesday and Saturday for a little bit because she thinks she's just falling apart. And Amanda absolutely cracks it at her and tells her that that's not what real family is, and that's not what responsibility actually looks like, and that she doesn't get to be happy and fun for Nessie all the time, so why should Rachel? And it was really great for me to talk about her as if she was a real character, because I ended up getting a lot of really cool stories from people who have been in dynamics where, they get to be the fun auntie without the responsibilities, and then the mother who has to do the day-to-day dirt of the thing just doesn't have the energy and doesn't have the time or capacity to be able to inject the kind of imagination creativity in, but also ends up kind of resenting that. And so I think Amanda's jealousy towards Ray and Bron ended up being a really fun and meaningful way for me to explore like different angles of childcare, because as I was writing the story, I was going through a lot of parenting feelings myself and trying to figure out, like, I love children and I have children around me, but like, what does that actually, what's that going to look like in a larger way? Like, what kind of responsibility do I want to welcome into my life? And what kind of responsibilities can I expect from my queer community around me as well? If you go to the next slide, there's one more slide that will kind of illustrate this dynamic between Nessie and Amanda as well as mother and child. And it's after Nessie has been brought home and Amanda just cannot continue the momentum that Ray and Bron as the aunties have been able to keep up. And she's trying to, she can't really get on the same bandwagon. She doesn't really understand how Ray and Bron have been maintaining that kind of energy and that kind of creativity. And so she kind of reveals a little bit of vulnerability to Nessie. And Nessie, who doesn't necessarily know how to address it in all the way that an adult would, kind of respond with her own softness and her own support to Amanda, kind of manages her feelings, which, I was also having a lot of conversations with friends around me around like the traits of a parentified child and what that looks like in a teenager versus what that looks like in a 6-year-old. And so that was something that really informed the writing of that, of these kinds of scenes. Okay, so here ends the things that I wanted to say about the book. By all means, please, there's one more slide, it's just a pencil version of Rachel and Amanda sitting on a bench. It happens just after Rachel has been swearing around the child, and then Amanda asks her if she's been swearing around her child.
My name is Mette Kærulf Lorentzen, and my pronouns is she, her. I live in Copenhagen, in Nørrebro, which is a kind of diverse part of the city. I live with my wife, I'm alone, and together we have 6 children and 4.5 grandchildren. And you have to excuse my English once in a while. I'll probably say some nonsense, but please ask me. I can't multitask. I'm not reading the chat while speaking, so I'm just showing you some slides and you're welcome to ask just anything. Okay. I'm very pleased to participate, and this is my 2nd time participating in LDComics. I didn't know this group was existing, but it's so great to be led into other people's work and see what you're presenting. I'm amazed, and I'm definitely planning to participate as long as possible in the future. It's quite a while ago I've been out talking about this book, and I would have liked to sit in a pub sharing a pint with you all, but I think you can do that now, and I can do it here in Copenhagen, but probably there will be a while till we can do it together again, unfortunately. I'm educated an architect, and after 30 years of profession as an architect, I started silently, slowly getting into this area. And I'll start my slides, try to share my screen now. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my inspiration. Of course, like most children, I read Donald Duck and Tintin and whatever, but I tend, maybe like most people too, to stop really drawing when I was around 12, and also stop reading cartoons and stuff like that. But when I realized maybe in my 30s that there was a special kind of books, those graphic novels that were not as much as about heroes or superheroes as about anti-heroes, they catch my interest again, and I started to read. I found these very worn books in my bookshelves. Of course, Alison Bechdel. For a dyke like me, this was really, really amazing to find her stories. And also Persepolis, of course, by Marjane Satrapi. They're two of the most important inspirations for me during the last many years. These are two Danish graphic novelists, Rikke Villersen and Signe Parkins. They're very inspiring to me. I don't think they're translated, but they have this very special, very artistic, and very their voice and their style is very special, and they also write and draw about female or women's experiences in a very fascinating way. So I hope you'll be able to at least to see them, because you don't really need to understand them. They're very crazy in a great way. So they're two of my favorites in Danish. Now what? Why doesn't it want to go? I have problems. When I came out was a Danish book in my first novel. It's called Skamlebben in Danish, and it was translated and published in English in last autumn, 2020. Came out in Danish in 2018. It's autofictional. I mean, I'm not a rabbit, but it's also based on a lot of personal experiences. So the emotions are autobiographical, and of course the scene and the universe is this anthropomorph with the rabbit and different animals. The Danish cover was maybe more provocative. I tried to depict this. This tension in a grown-up adult parent life, where you have a secret sex life, maybe, and you also have, this is her note with a shopping list, buying milk and candy for the children. This tension between life's weird what do you say? Udfordringer, challenges. When I grew up in the 60s, there were not many representations for LGBT plus people. They were all depicted as weirdos or sick people, and who wanted to be that? So when I fell in love for the first time with a woman, I was 25. I was married. I had children. So I was staying in this marriage and living this internalized secret love life with husband and children for many years. I didn't come out till I was 39, almost 40. I was so ashamed, and I was quite convinced that coming out was a nightmare. Well, the nightmare was that I would lose my family. I would lose the love of my kids and lose my friends, etc. My colleagues, whatever. And I realized when I came out that these nightmares were wrong, of course. I didn't imagine this amazing community that I found as a LGBT activist. So this book is a tribute to the courageous people who came out before me, and they also still fight with their lives throughout the world. I want to tell you a little about how the process was and something about more practical, technical things, tools and methods. My very first drawings were definitely inspired by Alison Bechdel. It was about this group of lesbian women or animals sitting around this table, and they're kind of challenging each other to go out to do wilder and wilder things. And when I made these cartoon, I fantasized about something called naked night yoga, and thinking that it was impossible that existed, but it does exist. I found out later on in New York, of course, it does exist, but this was in a park. Then I went, after having made these cartoons for maybe a year or two, or working as an architect in daytime, I got curious and sent some of my cartoons to an editor, Pernille Arvidsen, at the publisher Cobolt in Copenhagen. And she answered me that she thought it was interesting and I could come and have a meeting. And we had this first meeting, and she said, I don't think it's that funny, the thing you make, but I think there's a story behind it. Would you try to write that story? Write a script or a storyline first. And I started to write, and I wrote and I wrote, and I made all kinds of suggestions, and I think I probably write on this storyline for a year before I definitely started to, of course I was drawing characters on the side, and the rule was for her, it's extremely important to have a structure before you start getting too much in love with your drawings or your characters. And I think she's right, but I also really write and draw on the side, but not drawing cartoonish before it's the script is really finished. Then I started making thumbnails, these mini pages with a story. This is where the protagonist Louise, she's coming into this group of other late bloomers, and she's in the beginning she's lying. She can't make herself tell the truth that she's a lesbian, but as she sees these other persons coming out in front of her, she grasps the courage to do it herself. I made, when I came out, as a traditional analog process. I draw it first paper, first with a pencil thumbnails, then I penciled everything as an underlay, and then I drew it up with pen and ink and brushes, etc. This is the final process with making the cover. Skamlebben is a Danish title, and it's a Danish name. It's a horrible name, but it's still used by doctors and everything. It means shame lips, directly translated, and it's the name of the vulva, which and it's a very terrible word because there's this shame in it, but also Leppe is a nickname for dike, so it's shame dike, but it also means the vulva. This double name we couldn't translate to English, unfortunately. This is one of the first pages in the finished work. The protagonist, Rabbit Louise, she grows up in a heteronormative home with the parents, mother and father, and siblings. And this is one of the first scenes where she's saying no, "Nei" is no, because her mother wants her to wear a dress. And later on, we see part of the beginning of the story is in her childhood, where she falls in love with a pig, Rose. But later on, we follow her in her grown-up life. She's 40, and her father and mother are getting apart because her mother has dementia and has to live in a care home. And these worries and I mean, you have children at home, you have old parents and they're all helpless, and still you have to struggle with your own sexuality and identity, and all these things that just get wilder and wilder the older you get. These are, she's hiding in the toilet writing her diary, and she's fantasizing about how a real lesbian looks like. Of course, this is a tough woman with a motorbike, or she's trying to imagine what it will be like to go on Tinder and be swiped away, and where do you find love, and so on. And then this page ends with someone calling mommy outside the door. The next project, I can't say so much about, it's still in progress, but I'm telling you a little bit about I have this romantic, thing about drawing with pencil and drawing with ink, but I'm also trying to challenge myself in terms of using the digital a little more freely. So this is a digital cold drawing, like a thumbnail that I do in my next project. And I realized that some of the tools you can find in a program on iPad called Fresco, you probably know it, all of you, has this possibility. So I'm not getting too detailed when I'm composing the story or making the characters, but this charcoal pen in Fresco is very rough in a way that makes it impossible to be detailed too early. This is a thumbnail with one of the persons in the story. It's about a young girl and an old woman. The young girl is afraid to grow up, and the old woman she's not afraid of dying. And so they both teach each other something. Here she's dressing after a bath, and she's talking with the young girl via Skype. The picture at the left is this old woman Gerda. Also, I make some quick sketches sometimes when I have an idea in the train or somewhere where I can't draw. There's a very primitive drawing program where you can draw with your finger on your iPhone called Sketchbook. And I have this idea with this Gerda. She's having COVID and she's falling through these giant COVID virus. And then this other drawing to the right is the same, where I try to draw it real time or like a finished drawing in Fresco also. So I'm practicing doing the digital, trying to find the possibilities there instead of having my romantic cling to this first technique that I was taught, and also the one that when I came out was done by. So I've thrown myself into the digital universe. I hope I will survive. Another book I've just started on is a more educational book for young adults about sex, gender, and body. I don't know the final shape of it, so I can't really show you anything, but I'm looking forward to make that as well.